Okay, good morning, friends. I have a rough idea of what I want to talk about. I'm building up to. It's a story about real world companies like Design Science Toys. I have, for example, here's one of their toys, and this was a company based near Tivoli, upstate New York. Like I took Amtrak there a few times, and I got to meet um, a very brave little family, and all their um, world was wonderful. And anyway, these are magnetized. They're made of wood. They're very, I would not think these are easy to get anymore. And it was a tough market, and it was all about geometry and learning the Bucky stuff. And my work with them involved this toy, which is still shrink wrapped here. Okay. Now, the graphics on the cover of this shrink wrapped box are what I was working on. And if we scroll down in this page, which is at my 4D Solutions website, first of all, you see why, for me anyway, object-oriented programming always seemed to fit as to what I wanted to do. In other words, vectors are already objects, right? We already think of them as like these things that have these abilities. And I like to do operator overloading. So it's just like the semantics don't change that much. What you learn in school around vectors, you can continue in that same vein and write your own vector class. And from there, I got my edges, which connect any two vectors. And my vectors always originate from the terminus, from the tail. I mean the origin. So these vectors go out like this from a convergent point. And of course, we have translation, there's rotation. You can have as many of these stars or beacons as you wish. Whatever. There's a world to this, right? And so this is the thing I came up with, the kind of thing. And that's, again, I've mentioned this previously in the channel, I think, right? I'm just going to seem like a tangent, okay? But we've been, in recent videos, looking at Americana and place-based education and fanning out from a convergence point of your choice. Now, I recommend autobiography. I recommend rooting it in your place. And I hope, that you live in a country where you're free to do that. And that's the kind of, what if you can't do that, right? What if you're not allowed to even announce that you exist, right? So when I say I think place-based education is a good idea and I encourage it and all this, I realize there's a percent of my would-be audience that are like, yeah, but we can't do that, so therefore, whatever, and you may go away. And I understand, right? Like, I'm not going to try to keep you here against your will or anything. But what we've been talking about in this channel is, like, a growing radius around, say, the state of Oregon. And you'll notice that at the very bottom of this page here, I've got a little waving flag, an animated GIF, and that's been there for a long time. These are from the 1990s, like when it first became possible to serve static web files, hand-coded HTML. I learned enough HTML to just hand write. And I think the color coding, I had different solutions for that, right? Like there was some Guido's brother, I think, had written a color coding algorithm. Anyway, somehow this stuff ends up being color coded, the source code I'm talking about. So what am I really showing you here? First of all, that object-oriented, I was going to say this was going to take us a little far afield maybe, but Oregon, while we're on the topic, and Americana, Ken Kesey, see, back to history, how I would go forward into like the 60s is, of course, follow the bus, the Ken Kesey bus, if you know what I'm talking about, right? This is an actual celebrated bus that went across country, and there's a book about it, and the characters therein all become, not all, but, people you can follow. Wavy Gravy, okay, stuff like that. Grateful Dead, all these things. Get into contemporary times. Remember, I was back in the Hearst versus Orson Welles. I've been watching a lot of Orson Welles on YouTube. Just interviews and stuff. He's very personable, isn't he? I really enjoy those interviews. So that was a bit of a detour, my flashing on the Ken Kesey. But the point was, we are growing a graph. And in my case, a lot of it's around Portland, Oregon, and then the Columbia Gorge, and then, but you can zoom in, zoom out, however you want to do it. I'm just thinking of keep it fluent as far as that you're on planet Earth and help people get oriented as to where you're at. Okay. And back to Facebook, I'm going to close with one more thing. It's in the purview of what I talk about. In other words, Grunch of Giants is a book by Bucky Fuller, his last one. He wrote with help from Kiyoshi, right? And a lot about Kyoshi's been coming up, and I've seen more articles about him than I've had in a long time, which has been good. And I've been sharing this information. So talk about Kiyoshi, and I have talked about Kiyoshi in another video. He's a chief collaborator of Bucky Fuller's. And along those lines, right, in what way was Fuller kind of subversive? Well, he picked up on that corporate personhood thing, and so did Tom Hartman in his book Unequal Protection, which is a very well-written, this guy's a really good scholar, right? And he's written some excellent stuff, and he has podcasts, and he's a very serious intellectual guy who I respect, blah, blah, right? You can hear that I like him. And I like this book, and it was interesting. And here, when we're talking about slavery and racism and the legacy of slavery and all that we're talking about now with the riots and protests and the vocabulary there is all charged. Here is a guy who's saying, you know what? The way that corporations got to be persons and treated with the same, actually they're the super race now. The big corporations are really the giants that run the earth, kind of, is what Bucky was talking about in Grunch of Giants. It has a lot to do with this doctrine of corporate personhood. And really, it was leveraging what was done to change slaves from part human to full human in the eyes of the law. Well, if you can do that with people, can't you do that with these automatons or these things that represent people in the law, almost people? Let's make them people too. Let's take this thing that we know how to do now, of take quasi-people and make them people in the eyes of the law, and let's do that with our Frankenstein monster things that, are very predatory by design and aren't supposed to, ruthless, whatever, and limited liability. So they're like a lot like a super race. And we've concocted them and injected them into part of the law. Like the whole world doesn't run on this same law, we should remember. Right? That's a quiet little battle that always goes on. How we're going to architect the future. And engineers have something to say about that, just given all the software involved. How transparent, how open, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, we'll talk about many of these things someday. I just wanted to really focus on some of this Toy Story stuff. And the whole kind of, there's a buried footnote here. You can get more into it. The world of toys and artifacts, and like, when does it go from toy to not toy? And by the way, speaking of toy to not toy, let's go to, I'll just quick finish out on Flickr here. For those new to this channel, I work with this substance, we'll call it. It can be implemented in different substances, but plastic, it's plastic in this form called C60 is what it's called. And I just took delivery from the inventor of it. Like, I am one of the people who sees ways to work it into my curriculum. So this is a shot of my backyard this summer, 2020, and you're looking straight on into a cuboctahedron frequency, 1, 2, 3 frequency, right? And this pile over here, I just took delivery of that. Okay, so what we do with it, we're thinking about different plans. I just had a visiting faculty. You see the previous video, people visiting camped in this area. And, you know, if we have a visitor who wants to play with this stuff, I could just turn them loose, right? But we'll see. I'll talk to you in the near future about what goes on in that respect. Talk to you later.